In today's video, we are talking about my top 10 concealer favorites. As a person that has hereditary dark circles, dark sunken under eyes, I've spent thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars on concealer, but through all of the trial and error, through all of the bad makeup days, I have a force for good now. In this video, I'm able to share with you guys the products that do not look dry under the eyes, the ones that actually give beautiful coverage, that look natural. It's kind of all led up to this, so I hope that you guys enjoy it, and let us begin. By the way, I am talking about color correctors for under the eyes. I'm talking about my favorite face concealers for blemishes, hyperpigmentation, and I'm talking about regular kind of all over flexible concealers. Let's first talk about the Armani Luminous Silk Concealer. This is a concealer that I've loved for quite a while, for years now. And it's because it's just a very skin-loving concealer. Quite often, when we talk about concealers that run on the thin side, they often have this weird dry down that kind of sucks the moisture out from the skin. This is kind of the antithesis of that. I really enjoy it because it gives a very lifelike kind of coverage under the eyes. It's definitely more of a light to medium coverage. You're not going to get full coverage out of this, but it gives a beautiful soft blur. There's a nice radiance, and the texture is quite thin. So if you enjoy kind of a thinner concealer, but you still want hydration, this is where I would lead you to. I can't tell you guys how many thin, hydrating, or luminous concealers there are out on the market that, again, have that weird dry down period that just sucks all of the moisture out of the skin. Highly, highly recommend checking out a product like this instead of those items. Something that I have talked about a lot on my channel is that concealers that say it's going to be hydrating and matte or hydrating and weightless, you need to be a little bit cautious of these kinds of products. Companies will say whatever they can to get you to make your purchase. If they say it's going to be hydrating and also 24-hour wear, there's a good chance that that's not true. So if a thin, glowy look on the skin is what you're looking for, with more of just that natural, everyday kind of coverage, I would go with the Armani Luminous Silk. I also absolutely love using this one kind of all over the face. Typically, what I will do with this one is apply it all over the skin, under the eyes as well, and then blend and be done. So this is definitely that quick kind of 5-minute makeup product that I have loved for quite a while. Let's talk about a newer favorite to my collection, which is the Canmake Color Mixing Concealer. Now this is the 03 shade. Kind of having done more research now on the concealer, I think I probably could have gone with a lighter shade. What I will say about this is that it works both as a concealing and correcting kind of palette. There is kind of this peachier shade that I find really counteracts the blue and purpleness under the eyes that I have from just pigmentation and general veins under my eyes. This just does an incredible job of looking very natural, but also being creamy enough that you're actually getting good coverage. So there are a lot of correctors that kind of almost have this putty-like texture that's very drying. And that very thick kind of putty texture becomes very apparent once it's under very thin skin, like our under eyes. So I always like to recommend color correctors, especially because color correctors typically are used as like a layering product. But I will say, if you want all of my tips on actually concealing and application-wise, I do have a video on this already. I just posted it. I will leave a link down below to it because one of my favorite tips is to actually mix a corrector into your concealer. I'm going to show you guys how I would use a color corrector for the Canmake demo with a concealer to kind of get the right shade for me. This is the shade 16N. It's a really good shade match for my face, but for under my eyes, I think a little color correction could help. So let me show you what I would do. When you're using a color corrector as another layer of product, you really don't want it to be a heavy product that's kind of sitting on top of the skin. This texture is really nice because it still has a grip to it that will give you the coverage that you want. I would say this is definitely more of like a medium coverage, but it doesn't have too much of that waxiness, that puttiness. So as far as texture goes, this is pretty ideal. Canmake is a Japanese brand and their shade range just is not as great as some of the others we're going to talk about. I certainly think that if you are someone that enjoys thinner, more natural makeup, you're looking for a color corrector that is great for on the go as well, I think that this one is a great option. But as far as this as a concealer, I also really enjoy these two shades within the palette, and you get this beautiful little brush that has kind of a pinpoint sponge as well as a brush. Now the brush is really good, I think, to kind of tuck into the tear trough if you just want to kind of lighten certain areas of the under eye. But this is really nice just to kind of pinpoint conceal as well, because you do have this little concealing like baby sponge. I think it's really nice for on the go. And there is also a mirror in here. This is definitely a top find for me, though it is newer, it has quickly become a favorite. Now, for those of you that want a creamier concealer that is more long wearing, I highly recommend the Tarte Shape Tape creamy version. Now, this is not the original. The original I've never really enjoyed myself. It's always been a bit too drying on me. A little bit will go a long way, so really you don't need a lot of this. The coverage is quite intense and it can easily look heavy if you're not being careful. But with a light hand, this concealer lasts a very long time. And it also has a dry down. So oftentimes when you're dealing with a self-setting concealer or a concealer that does eventually dry down, they can often really suck the moisture out of your skin. But this one I think does a really nice job of having a nice balance between being creamier and hydrating and also setting down to more of that locked in finish. I think especially if you have combination skin or even oily skin, I think you will really, really appreciate this. In the winter, it's not like my first choice as far as hydration goes, but I have found in the past when I really want my makeup to lock in and last, this is one that I will use with a light hand and have had really, really nice makeup days with. It also works really nicely on blemishes as well. So especially for more combo to oily skin, I definitely recommend this one. I would say another option that is pretty similar to the Tarte Shape Tape Ultra Creamy is the Dior Forever Skin Correct. The only real difference I can kind of see between the two concealers is that I think the Dior has more of a smoothing kind of look, and it is slightly more hydrating. I also love this one as kind of a foundation, so if I want a very perfected look to my skin very quickly, I want it to last, but I need to get there very quickly, like I need to get the makeup on my face, I'll oftentimes use this all over the face, kind of like swiped, like one swipe here, a couple swipes on the cheeks and then under the eyes, blend all over, and I will get a very nice kind of locked in perfected look with this concealer. It is another one of those concealers that I think you could easily overdo. Like I have tried it on some days when my skin is a little bit more dry and I've over applied and it started to look more makeup-y. So again, you really don't need a lot. And I also think it's important to note that this isn't a bad makeup product just because it can be overused. I think we have to get to know our makeup and how products best apply. You know, that's my whole job here on my channel. This is a creamy, very full coverage concealer, so of course it's going to look a little bit more makeup-y if you're using quite a lot of it. So just keep that in mind. But this has been a product that I like has really slowly grown on me. And I really, really enjoy it again for really locking in my makeup and getting a very perfected look. Quite smoothing, like I mentioned before, which if you're dealing with a lot of pigmentation on the skin or acne or anything like that, it's always nice to have that extra bit of coverage, that extra bit of smoothing. So maybe not like the top recommendation for no makeup, but for nice perfected, that kind of makeup, I would recommend this. Now, I will say, I think the glass is the new packaging. I honestly, every time I look it up, I forget. I've used the shade both 1 and 1.5, but I do think 1 is a better shade for me. The top is the shade 1 and the bottom is the shade 1.5. It's more of just a difference kind of in the undertone. So I do have a mixture of two concealers under the eyes. I'm going to talk about the other one in a second, but I'm also wearing the Salt New York concealer. This is one that I wanted to give a mention to in this video because if you enjoy a concealer similar to like the Glossier stretch concealer, or you really like these potted concealers, you like the hydration that they give you, I highly recommend checking out the Salt New York. Also, they have corrector shades now, which I hadn't realized for some reason. I'm going to go and like purchase one because this is the ideal texture that I want out of a corrector. So they have a great moisturizing quality to them. So they're going to look very natural on the skin, but they also have the grip that you want and the actual pigment. So something that I always loved about something like the Glossier Stretch Concealer is that moisture, but it always remained really slippy and dewy. This gives you that freshness, that dewiness, but it locks in and stays where you actually place it. So it makes for a better product. It makes for a better experience. It almost to me feels like an eye cream with maximum pigment. So I think really lovely for like mature skin if you have dry under eyes like I do. I did want, like with the kind of makeup I'm wearing today, I did feel the need to add a little bit of the Ciele concealer on top just to give me even more coverage. But for that just light coverage under the eyes, this is a really beautiful product and also quite affordable. I think the refill is like $16. I will say though that I put it into this compact and now I can't get it out. I have to find something to get this out on the other end. So I don't know what shade this is. I'm gonna try and find out though what shade this is in my email. I'll be able to find in my email, but I can't find out right in this moment. I will leave all the shades that I use down below for you guys in case you guys are interested. Okay, next let's talk about a newer concealer favorite. I discovered this concealer last year when it launched, and at first I liked it. Then I kept using it and I was like, you know, this is pretty good. And now I think at least 6 months later, it has truly become a favorite and one that I'm reaching for quite a lot. So this is the Ciele Conceal and Protect. Ciele, I think, has just done such an incredible job with their base products. I'm wearing their skin tint today. Beautiful, like really nice for very hydrated but also perfected makeup. Kind of just like a dry-skinned person's dream. And the same goes with the concealer. Actually, I find that this is kind of packed with coverage. You can absolutely get a medium coverage with just like that much concealer. It has almost this kind of whipped consistency. I mean, maybe you can even see on the applicator itself. The applicator is loaded with product, very whipped, but you're not left with like a chalky feel. Like there's mineral SPF in here. It does have SPF 50. Now, listen, you're not going to get SPF 50 with just that much makeup on your skin. You know what I mean? So really take it with a grain of salt here. But some mineral makeup can be kind of chalky or awkward. I mean, this is not that at all. The formula in and of itself is very luxurious, melts on the skin. I'm actually wearing a mixture of two concealers. I put this on as the lasting, like, get me that coverage immediate kind of look. And I really love this concealer when I just want a lot of coverage with very little product, but I want it to look very natural and hydrating. Beautiful on blemishes as well because it has that hydrated finish. But again, this isn't ultra glowy. It leans more in the like satin finish realm. It does like slowly set down on the skin. And by the way, Ciele also has their pinpoint conceal brush. I wanted to mention this because I think it's a really unique tool. You have both the like pinpoint, take a little bit of product on and like spot conceal kind of thing with this. Also really nice to get just into the tear trough, but you also have this more like flat kind of concealer brush, which is interesting you're going to put the concealer right on the top of this, and then you can just press it in. So you're getting a lot more coverage with a little amount of product because it's just kind of sitting on top of the bristles, which is kind of ideal. I mean, you want the most coverage with the least amount of product for a more long wear look, for a more natural look, and this concealer has that. I just think it's really natural and it just gives me that creamy look on my skin. If you're a fan of something like the It Cosmetics CC cream, if you love that finish, that's what this reminds me of, except with an insane amount of pigment. It has that kind of whipped texture. It's really, really lovely, and has quickly become a favorite in my collection. And by the way, I do use the shade 3 and 4, but I'm kind of interested in the shade number 2 as well. These are like slightly too dark on me, but I can get away with it. Beautiful, beautiful concealer. Now, a concealer that I almost always gravitate towards like all year round, but I think especially for lightweight makeup lovers, the Tower 28 concealer, the Serum Swipe concealer, it's a wow kind of product. If you really like that self-setting quality out of your concealers, but you don't want to sacrifice the actual look of your under eyes, this is the concealer that I would recommend. It's really lovely and incredibly spreadable. I'm always surprised whenever I put it on how much it spreads. Like you add a little dab into the inner corner and then it spreads to the rest of the under eye. But I don't think it's just because of the coverage, it's the actual serum kind of quality that the concealer has. It's very thin on the skin and it does have more of a natural matte. This is probably not going to conceal any of the dryness that I have. You know what I mean? It's not going to add a ton of moisture. But really, any other time of the year, I absolutely love this. And I love how long wearing it is while being, again, such a thin product on the skin. Really does not look like a ton of heavy product, which is so, so important to me. I think those of you that love thin makeup that self sets will absolutely love this. Really don't need to set it. I've never felt the need to set this concealer once. So if you're someone that really does not like to set your concealer with a powder, you just find it really dries the heck out of your skin, this could be like the ultimate option for you, like an all-in-one kind of product. This is the shade CC, and I do think the shade CC is the best shade for me. I've also tried the shade BU. That's probably better for like more truly neutral skin, but I do find that for under my eyes, I do like a little bit more yellow or a touch of peach, and the CC shade gives me just a little bit of yellow. Let's talk about the Haus Labs concealer. Now, this concealer is not my most favorite for under the eyes, but I really wanted to mention it in today's video because I think for those of you that deal with like maybe hormonal acne, like you have both dry skin and hormonal acne, or you're dealing with a lot of textural issues on your actual face that also like you also want to cover, I've personally found that when my skin is doing really poorly, like I have a lot of dry pimples, that kind of, paradox can be really difficult to deal with because you want to hydrate the pimple, especially if it's flaking or if it's really dry, but you also want to conceal it, and really, really hydrating concealers can kind of be shiny. This has a really nice balance. It has a very natural finish and it's actually hydrating. Like, no one ever wants to put makeup on skin that is dry or textured. I think for spot concealing in the most like skin caring kind of way, in a way that actually covers but looks natural, I have just found that I always go back to this one. Something about the creaminess of the formula, it's just always done really well in these situations. It's not necessarily a holy grail concealer. I just think that for those of you that would really appreciate a texture like that or do deal with those very dry breakouts, that you might actually have some real luck with this. This color corrector from Sigma, this is the light to medium, but it's the Spectrum Color Correcting Duo. This color corrector is stunning. It's really, really lovely. It has an incredibly thin, but again, buildable texture. So it wants to stick to the skin where you place it, which means that it's not overly greasy, it's not overly slip slidey. It's going to stick where you place it, but it's also a relatively natural look. You know, in the pan, it looks quite emollient and it has the right amount of emollients that I think you want for under the eyes. But it doesn't leave you with that really greasy, flip off the skin and not actually last kind of texture. It's really nice. I also love that you have multiple shades. You know, if you do have a color corrector that you can kind of mix, that's pretty ideal because you're able to get just the right amount of peachiness. I also love, again, that it has a mirror in here. I think if you're looking for a really fuss-free kind of color corrector, there's a really good chance that this is going to be one that you can easily throw in your bag, mix with another item to get a really nice peachy undertone and just be out the door. I really have no real complaints about it. It is, again, more of a kind of glowy product. It's not going to slip slide around, but it does lean glowy. I would just say don't be afraid to set it with a little bit of powder. A little bit will go a long way with really any of these concealers. Shall we talk about the Kosas Revealer Concealer? This has been a holy grail of mine for years. The reason I've always loved it and I always go back and recommend it to you all is that it has the perfect medium coverage with that natural creamy finish that balances light in a really beautiful way that makes it pretty ideal for hollow under eyes. To correct hollowness, a lot of what you're doing is just bouncing light and figuring out how to brighten up shadows. The Kosas Revealer Concealer, because of the finish of it, because of the buildable nature of it, all of these things, it just looks the best on hollow under eyes in my opinion. Now I will say that if you're specifically dealing with hollow under eyes, the Tower 28, the Ciele, and the Kosas are like my top 3 at this point. All 3 of these work really well for hollow under eyes. They just have that bouncing of light kind of quality to them. But I do think that the Kosas Revealer Concealer has a really nice balance between being creamy, having that medium coverage, but also just looking very natural under the eyes. It's not a heavy product. It's not an overly greasy, slip slidey item. It's really hard to also overdo it. So if you're someone that tends to layer concealer and you're worried about your concealer looking heavy by the end of it, this is such a buildable formula that I really don't think you're going to have that issue with it. I really rarely like over apply this to the point where it looks bad. That really has happened a handful of times out of the hundreds of times I've applied this on my face. The shade 1.5C is really great for me. I really enjoy it for under the eyes. It gives a nice brightened effect. It does slightly color correct as well. I also think this layers really well for a color corrector if you do still want to use one. It's just absolutely excellent. I just could not be without it. Okay guys, so we got into the formulas, but I know it's really helpful for you guys to have kind of like a ranking system. So I want to kind of break this ranking system up a little bit and give you guys like my top picks for certain categories. I know I already kind of talked about it within each of the individual reviews, but I think it might just be helpful as kind of like a recap. That's what I want to do for you guys really fast here. Okay, so getting into color correctors themselves. This one's going to be a little bit weird. My top recommendation is going to be the Salt New York. Now, I have not tried that color correcting shade that they have, but this one alone already kind of gives me a bit of a brightened color corrected effect. Again, I'm going to leave the shade down below, but if there is an actual peach tone that they have, which I'm seeing on their website, I can't imagine that it wouldn't help even more. So I'm going to give this one the #1 spot. It has the most buildable coverage out of the 3, and it works really well in combination with other products if you do want to use this under something. So I think it's just a really nice, versatile color corrector. It also works really nicely on the face for a very natural effect, but specifically for under eye correctors, I want to give this one the #1 spot. Now, #2 spot is going to go to the Sigma Spectrum Color Correcting Duo. This is the light to medium. Again, This one is just slightly less coverage than the Salt New York and slightly thinner. I think some people will enjoy that. So, you guys know you best. If you want something a touch thinner, maybe go with the Sigma. Both are pretty similar. I do like that the Salt New York feels that you can really build it up, but this one has been a classic for me at this point. Very natural. And I will say, guys, like, out of all these rankings, keep in mind that I hate most color correctors. Like, not just dislike, I hate most color correctors. They're always so putty-ish and dry under the eyes. I don't think you're gonna go wrong with any three of these. And then my last pick would be number 3 spot would be the Canmake. Really a lovely, lovely formula. Love how you can just throw it right into your bag. So that's my opinion on color correctors here. Now let's rank concealers for the face itself. Because everyone's skin type is a little bit different, I'm going to give rankings based on like skin type. For very dry skin, I would say the best for the face itself would be the Armani Luminous Silk Concealer. This works beautifully as kind of just like almost a foundation. But if you want more coverage, I would go with the Haus Labs. So more coverage, Haus Labs. If you want just like very sheer coverage under the eyes and on the face, I would go with the Giorgio Armani. I hope these ranking systems aren't too confusing, but really, what's a ranking system if no one knows why it's ranked the way it is? For under the eyes and on the face, for kind of normal to dry skin, I will go with the Dior Forever Skin Concealer. I really like the kind of softened, creamy finish of this one, but if you have more combo to oily skin, I will go with the Tarte Shape Tape Ultra Creamy. Both of these work really beautifully and they give you the longevity. I'm never disappointed with the longevity of these concealers. And lastly, for perhaps the most difficult category to even rank in, hollowness under the eyes. For concealers that really bounce light in a way that helps with the hollowness under your eyes, these are my top 3. Number 3, we have the Tower 28 Serum Swipe Concealer. I'm reaching for this if I want my under eye concealer to last a long time, but I also want the hollows to be concealed really beautifully. I love how thin it is on the skin. And I think also if you have more oily skin, but you also deal with hollowness under your eyes, I think that you will have a really nice time with this and it's going to give you a little bit more longevity. Number 2, this is kind of crazy to me. The Ciele Conceal and Protect, number 2 spot. It is beautiful, you guys, and I've been so impressed by it. If you really like that whipped kind of creamy texture, you like a lot of pigment, like really a lot of pigment, you will really enjoy this one. Very creamy, never drying. Honestly, I've used it all over the face as well, and it just gives you this really creamy, hydrated look. Absolutely a concealer I would go back and repurchase. Definitely one that more people need to talk about. And I mean, it's number 2 for a reason. Number 1, Kosas Revealer Concealer. Probably a surprise to not many of you, but it is just the most, but it really is that Goldilocks concealer for me. I think if you have more dry under eyes, but you also deal with hollowness, but you also want more of a medium pigmentation, it just has the best of all of these worlds. Really creamy and fresh under the eyes. It's not going to make the under eyes look more heavy and dark. It's a beautiful one, and I have loved it. Gone through, I don't even know how many tubes of this. And that, my friends, are all of my top 10 concealer recommendations. I'm going to leave my top 10 concealer tips that I wish I knew sooner down below for you guys, because though it's nice to have a good formula, I mean, you need a good formula. If you don't have the techniques to get the best bang out of your buck and the best performance out of your product, then it's a little bit of a waste. So I will say, definitely check out that video. I think it's going to be helpful for you guys. I'm going to leave all of the concealers down below as well as all of my shades down below, so make sure to check that out. If you have any questions, I'm always in the comments. So thank you guys in general just for watching. Thank you for being here, and I will see you guys in my next one.